webinars on resilience and the series. So we're going to jump right in. And as Denise said, please feel free to send me questions and comments in the chat box using that chat feature throughout the program. It's awesome to hear from you. And there may be a couple of places where I ask you to kind of respond. I think sometimes it's fun to both listen and watch and also do a little bit of typing kind of to keep us energized as we go through this material. If you have a question you'd like to ask me, but you'd rather not ask or post it in the chat box or share it with everybody today, if you want to talk about something that's more confidential or, especially concerning or something you're worried about, please know that I welcome your phone calls and your emails, and I'm here as a resource. My team at the Nonprofit Risk Management Center is incredibly proud of our relationship with the National Community Action Partnership and all of the community action agencies around the country. And we really enjoy hearing from you and serving you and supporting your mission. So don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or concerns or things you want to talk about that are risk related. So you've got my contact information on that first page. Just a little bit of a reminder about who we are. It's been my honor to be the CEO of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center for the past 25 years. This is an organization that's about 30 years old that was created to be a resource for other nonprofit organizations and public entities as well. And throughout that history, we've worked really hard to make risk management approachable, make it something that people feel comfortable doing, with the understanding that when you manage risk, you should be able to take more risk, right? So it's all about advancing your mission and kind of going down this pathway, this journey of your mission successfully and in a safe and healthy way, but ultimately so you can take bigger risks down the road. When you get comfortable with risk, I think it's so true that over time, you then realize that you're in position to take additional risks. So that's what we're all about. That's our mission. Let's go on to the next slide. Here we go. So this is the agenda that I prepared for today. Just three pretty straightforward topics in line with the description that you saw for the session. I want to start by talking about, why should we be talking about readiness? What is readiness and what do we mean by that? And why should we be talking about that? Oops, hang on one second. There we go. And then I want to talk about some strategies and techniques to evaluate readiness, right? How do you know you're ready to face that risk or that crisis event or that disruption around the corner, right? How do you know? What are some ways? And I want to share today what I'm calling 3 lenses through which to evaluate readiness. And I've come up with a kind of a scenario we'll use to kind of test the 3 lenses so you see what I'm talking about. And then, as with all my webinars, I like to end with some food for thought, right? I'm calling it final tips and takeaways, but it's really some things to think about as you reflect on and engage with others in your agency around this topic of readiness. And really, you're asking yourself the question, are we ready? Are we resilient? Are we prepared? Have we done what we can to not only survive, but to thrive during that next interruption? And some of us, of course, are facing some serious and severe weather this week. And so it's another form of disruption and interruption to add to the pandemic and other things going on in our world now. But so let's go ahead and jump in. Let me advance to the next slide here. So why evaluate readiness? Why is it important to understand whether we're ready for what's coming? So I want you to think about this wild world of risk, right? This world that we live in that's full of risk. Every agency exists in a landscape that's complex, that's changing, it's dynamic. And as leaders of organizations, we have very little control over the world around us, right? We control our own organizations, how we're structured, how we operate, the manner in which we deliver services, the people who serve in a leadership capacity. These are things that we control, but there are so many things that we don't control. We have no control over the economy in our community or in our country, right? We have no control over weather events. We certainly had no control or ability to stop this global pandemic. So the world around us is incredibly complex, it's incredibly dynamic, and it's changing. Sometimes it's changing dramatically, and sometimes those changes are subtle. But it's important to really just ground ourselves and recognize that we live in this wide world of risk. Now, there are some risks, some events that you can anticipate and that you can certainly try to avoid. And so the example that I've provided here is just an important one, and that is we can avoid serious injury or death from smoke inhalation by having smoke detectors that are working properly in our homes, in our offices. So there are some things we can anticipate, could happen, might happen, and we can avoid through kind of smart risk management, basic risk management. But there are so many risks out there that are impossible to either anticipate or anticipate clearly and thoroughly or avoid. And so what that leaves us with is this need to just be ready for anything, to be literally ready for anything. Yeah. I want to talk for just a minute about a concept that we see a lot in the field of risk management. I'm sure some of you have experienced this, and I'm so sorry. Arlene just sent a chat, let me know that my slides are not advancing. So let's do a little bit of technical. Let's do a little bit of a technical reset. So hang on, everybody. This is a good exercise in having a backup plan, which is what risk management is all about. Let me just, this very same thing happened on another webinar that I was teaching this morning, completely different topic, completely different audience, and we had the exact same technical issue. It was actually a different platform as well, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure why this is happening. Let me go back and let me ask either Arlene or Denise to let me know if when I go to advance my slides, you see a change. So let me ask you, did you just see a change or no? I'm not seeing any chat messages, so I'm not sure what's happening, ladies. All right. I'm going to try now. The slide I have in front of me is the webinar agenda. Denise or Arlene, could you let me know if you're seeing that now? Yes, okay, you're seeing this. All right, so you see the webinar agenda. I've already talked about this. These are the 3 topics. I'm going to move on. We're talking about readiness. I've just talked a little bit about the wide world of risk, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, so the slide in front of me now says, does scoring likelihood and impact help? All right, so again, Arlene and Denise, don't hesitate to jump in with that chat or coming on over the audio to let me know if the mouse clicks are not working as intended. So one of the things that you're going to see a lot in risk management is this understanding or this approach where you come up with a long list of risks. And some people call it the risk register, right? It's a long list of risks. It's a very popular strategy in risk management. And then after you come up with a list of risks, then you try to score them somehow. You try to assign a score for likelihood or probability or impact and severity. This is a very popular way to do risk management, but it's not one that I favor. It's not one that my team recommends. And the idea behind it is, if you've got a long list of risks, how do you know which to focus on, right? Well, how do you know which is the most important? And that's where the scores come from, is if we can put numbers next to these risks, we'll be able to rank order our risks and know what to work on first. In my experience, that technique doesn't work well, and here's why. The technique is predicated on the fact that that risk management is all about having a long list of risks, and what my team has found over many years of doing this is that risk management is about taking action, about doing something to either reduce the likelihood or the downside impact of a risk. And the fact is, none of us can work on a list of 50 risks, no matter how we rank them. And so my gut feeling and what my team teaches is that it's far better to have some sort of risk plan, kind of a plan of action of what you're going to do, rather than a ranked list. And often when we try to score risks or assign likelihood or an impact scores to our risk events, we just end up making up numbers. Some people think something is imminent and it's highly likely to happen. Some think it will never happen. And then you average those numbers, you end up with some sort of number in the middle, which isn't very helpful at the end of the day. So this is not an approach that I recommend. And I actually wrote an article about this a couple of weeks ago. It was called Toss the Register, Make a Plan Instead. So I encourage you to check that out. That's in our Risk E-News, in our archives of Risk E-News. I know some of you are subscribers. So I don't think scoring likelihood and impact really helps. Oh, I wanted to show you this slide. This is our website, and you can see in the navigation bar across the top, there's a resources tab. And if you mouse over the resources tab and you go down, you'll see that Risky News is one of the options. So that's where you'll find that article that I was just talking about. All right, so what about risk, value, and readiness, right? This webinar and this series of webinars are all about resilience. My team believes that thinking about readiness, how prepared are you, is so much more valuable than spending time trying to rank your risks based on guesses about likelihood and severity. So I want to show you these three lenses through which you can evaluate readiness. All right, let's go on and talk about these lenses. So the first lens number one, is experience and familiarity. Experience and familiarity. There's a great quote from Paul Shoemaker, who teaches at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And Shoemaker said, "Experience is inevitable, learning is not." And I love that quote because it reminds me that every day we have experiences, every day, every minute of every day, you could say, right? Every week of last year, right? We have all these experiences in our personal and professional lives, but it's up to us to decide to learn from those experiences, to take those experiences and figure out how to apply them to make us better prepared for what's next, what's coming around the corner. So I encourage you to, as you think about certain risk events, certain interruptions that you're concerned about that could be disruptive in your agency, I encourage you to think about, have we faced this before? What happened when we faced that before? And then what steps have we taken to really incorporate insights and takeaways and learning from that experience? So use this lens of experience and familiarity to your advantage. And don't waste a good crisis, right? Don't waste an interruption or a disruption in your organization that you can learn from. And you may, as you start to reflect on this particular lens, you may identify something that's happened many years ago. Maybe it's pre-COVID, right? It's unrelated to the pandemic or recent severe weather. You may identify something that happened in your agency years ago that maybe you didn't take the time to apply and draw insights from that experience. Maybe you kind of wasted that opportunity. So I encourage you to do that, and feel free to share in the chat if there's something that you've learned from experience or being familiar with it, having experienced that event or set of circumstances before. I'd love to hear some of those takeaways. And I'd also love to hear in the chat if there are specific lessons and insights that your agency is applying that you learned from just getting through the first year of a global pandemic. So really important to reflect on our experiences. So I want to show you an example of this lens. So we're going to use this same scenario and apply all three lenses to this scenario. And the example is this. We have a senior leader who happens to be the CFO of a community action agency, who leaves his position without any warning or notice because he needs to take care of a family member who has fallen ill. And he was hoping to come back, planning to come back, but actually never came back because he wound up becoming the primary caregiver for his family. So he was unable to continue working at your agency. So this is what happened. This is our scenario. And so I would ask you to think about, if this has happened to your agency or might happen or could happen in your agency, what insights right? Have you applied? What's been learned from this experience? And I've just shared some data points for this hypothetical scenario and this hypothetical community action agency. So one of the things you might have learned, if this has happened or if something similar has happened, is that it's never a good idea to have one person be the only person who knows how to perform a critical task or access a critical system. And I was working with recently with a very large agency with about close to 1,000 employees. And they told me a story about a staff member who left to go on vacation, went overseas on vacation. And it wasn't until he was overseas and had to log into their systems that they realized he was the only person who knew how to perform a specific task related to payroll. And so there were like 2 steps in the payroll process. One was done by somebody in HR. One step was done by someone in HR. One step was done by somebody in finance. And this was the finance person. And he went overseas and had to log into their systems remotely to do that one task. So everybody got paid. This is an agency with about 1,000 people. So I hope that's never happened to you, but it's just a great reminder that it's never appropriate to have just one person who knows how to do a certain task or access certain systems. And so kind of continuing on with my scenario, we immediately identified gaps, not only where this individual who left, where there were gaps or places where there wasn't a backup plan, there wasn't somebody who could step in and do Jonah's job, but we identified other gaps as well for other positions. And then another insight that could be derived from this type of experience would be that we realized there's incredible value in having all current managers and executives in our agency designate and document their backup for key tasks. Who is your backup? And recently I was working with an agency and we were looking at at kind of a simple succession plan for their executive director. And what we did was we took all of the tasks, the most important tasks that the executive director does, and we broke them down. And then adjacent to those tasks, we indicated who could do that task if the executive director wasn't available. And we just went through the exercise with the executive director role, but you could certainly go through that exercise with all senior positions in your agency, right? All positions, senior management, supervisory, et cetera, right? All key positions. And that actually might cover pretty much everybody. And then another takeaway, again, this is a hypothetical takeaway from this scenario, is the idea that as an agency, we realized that we should be providing ongoing cross-training, and we should be looking at how to create career development pathways so that we have leaders and team members in the agency who are ready and interested and kind of set to go to step into roles as they become available. Right. So in this situation, right, again, it's a hypothetical, but no, it doesn't appear that anybody is ready to take on that CFO role. Some of those CFO responsibilities have not been assigned to others, and we've really missed a huge opportunity. So this is the first lens, experience and familiarity. And just remember that we never want to let a crisis or an event that we weren't prepared for go to waste. We want to try to find as many learning opportunities and experience and learning opportunities and insights as we possibly can. Okay, let's move on to lens number 2. And I'm calling this lens financial wherewithal. All right, financial wherewithal. And the bottom line question is, do we have the financial resources to address this risk that's at the top of our list, were it to materialize? And again, just reminding everybody, if you joined late, I'm recommending that you not try to create this exhaustive list of risks, but that you create a list of events or circumstances or future risks that would be impactful for your agency, in just a short list of maybe 3 to 5 risk events that are concerning, that you want to be better prepared for, that you want to build resilience around, and try these 3 lenses to kind of walk through the risks. All right, so lens number 2, and I just want to comment on a comment that's in the chat from Samuel. Thank you so much for sharing that you've learned that developing a succession plan and documenting work tasks is very important. and extremely important to avoid the whirlpool-like confusion with new employees. So great observation. I'm so glad you've learned that. I hope that you're sharing that knowledge and insight and just the importance of succession planning and documenting your tasks, and you're sharing that with others, and you're kind of creating in your agency this culture of cross-training and succession planning. It's so important. One of the things that I'm often reminded of is that people leave agencies for so many reasons and at so many different points in their periods of service, right, in their careers. And many of the reasons that lead people to leave are completely beyond your control. You don't get to choose when somebody leaves because they found a better paying job or a job that they find more interesting. You don't get to choose when somebody's partner or spouse moves to a different part of the country, right, or a different part of the world. You don't get to choose. So in most instances that lead to when people leave an agency, you as the supervisor or manager really don't get to make that selection, right? So many things beyond your control. All right, we're going to go back to our scenario, and now we're going to apply this financial wherewithal lens, what I'm referring to, the second lens. So we've got the same situation. We have Jonah, the CFO, who's left the organization without any notice. We didn't know he was leaving. He had some personal circumstances that arose that led him to leave, and he's not coming back. He's unable to come back. So using this financial lens, what might an agency learn, right? Well, in this example, I'm suggesting that the agency learned that an unplanned departure can cause a lot of stress and financial stress, including. So we learned that when Jonah left, he had a lot of accrued vacation, which we owed him. So we had to make a large payout to this individual who left, and we weren't really budgeting for that this month, right? The additional financial stress was that we had to find somebody to assume that person's role on a temporary basis because we didn't have anybody ready to go who was already trained and ready to step into that position. And so we had to hire a temp CFO. That's an additional cost that we weren't expecting. We also found that it's pretty expensive to recruit a new CFO. Some estimates or some resource organizations in this field say that it can cost up to a third of somebody's salary to find a new person to take that role, right? It takes time. It goes way beyond just advertising a position. That recruitment period costs money. So we've got the vacation payout that we weren't expecting, was not in our cash flow projections. We've got the cost of a temp CFO we weren't expecting, and then we've got the cost of recruiting a new CFO. And then that last observation or insight, again, using this financial wherewithal lens, is that we would have been in a much stronger position if we'd either set some funds aside for this or had some sort of reserve to cover this type of expense, right? So lots of things to kind of derive and learn from this type of experience with disruption that none of us hope to experience, but the truth is we're all likely to experience. So that's my financial lens, or financial wherewithal lens, I'm calling it. All right, number three. Lens number three is staff resources, right? Staff resources. And I'm sure you can come up with some additional questions you would add to this slide, but I've listed, do we have the experienced staff we would need and backups to those experienced staff if this risk were to materialize? So I want you to think about any risk that you might face, any serious interruption to normal in your agency. Do we have the experienced staff we would need to handle this? Really, are we ready? Right? Are we ready? So this is the staff resources lens. So let's go back to our hypothetical with Jonah leaving that CFO position. What are some takeaways? What are some things we've realized about our readiness or lack of readiness? Well, first, we realized that we should have had a temporary backup staff member designated for this position, and maybe for every key position in the agency, somebody who's able to wear two hats for a period of time. So I've indicated on this slide that, you know, the backup isn't expected to perform their job in full and the other person's job in full. Instead, the backup or the designee should have a sense of how would I handle both jobs at the same time for a period of maybe 2 weeks, maybe as long as 8 weeks, right? So some sort of reasonable period of time during which time we would start that recruitment process and look for that regular, I don't like to use the term permanent staff member because no staff positions are permanent, right? They're regular or they're temporary. Those are the better categories or the better terms to use. But as we look for that person to step into that regular position, whether they're inside the agency or they're coming from outside, that takes time. So as you think about the possibility of having to wear two hats, do your own job, and then take on somebody else's job as well, I think that period of 2 to 8 weeks is kind of reasonable. And of course, some things are going to have to slide a bit, right? And you're going to need additional help. You can't just take on a lot more work without any impact. So lots to think about there. So that's my third lens is, do we have the people in place to handle this this disruption, this type of disruption? So again, I want to encourage you to think about a handful, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 types of disruption that your agency could face. And I want you to think about your readiness. And it also could be the top 3 to 5 disruptions or interruptions or crisis events or risks that you've already faced, but where you didn't really extract those lessons that were there, right, and that were possible. And I want you to take some time to think about those lessons. So one of the things I've been thinking about as I've been reflecting on resilience and readiness is this idea of a readiness scale, right? How do we rate our readiness? So I definitely would encourage you to stay away from and not use a numeric scale where you're trying to plug in an exact number to how ready are we on a scale of like 1 to 100. I would use words such as the phrases you see in front of you now on this readiness scale slide. We are totally unprepared for that. Or perhaps we are experienced and equipped and we're prepared in some ways, but not other ways, right? So somewhat kind of that middle range, which is where many of our agencies are probably finding ourselves. And then the third is, we're confident. We are prepared to respond following these agreed upon procedures. So I would use a simple readiness scale like this to rate your agency's readiness. And so I want you to think about 3 to 5 at most events or circumstances that would be very disruptive to your agency, that would test your resilience. And I want you to think about these 3 lenses and the degree to which you are prepared to handle that risk, handle that change, handle that disruption. And I want you to use a pretty simple readiness scale, such as the one you're seeing in front of you now. So let's, just resolve to learn from the experiences that our agencies have. All right, I've got some final tips and takeaways to share. And again, I welcome your comments and resilience and readiness stories in the chat if you're willing to share. And I want to thank you. I want to thank Arlene and Denise for just reminding us of some of the resources available and how to access the slide deck and so forth. All right, my first takeaway is to share. Don't hide resources. Back when I started my career, back in the 1980s, I remember my boss used to use an expression called, need to know, right? Send somebody something on a need to know basis. He liked that expression. And I was taught that, we shouldn't disseminate information unless somebody needs to know. And so there was so much information that was kept away from people in our organization, from staff. We even talked about sharing information with the board on a need-to-know basis, right? I've really tried to change my philosophy about this, knowing that transparency is such an important value in an organization. People feel more connected to your mission if they know what's going on. There's a human desire to be in the loop, right? To be in the know. And so I want to encourage you to think about transparency. To what degree does your agency generously, consistently share information, right? Is the vast majority of information about what you do and how you do it, is it available to everybody who wants to know? I want you to use that want to know frame instead of the need to know frame, which is dated, right? It goes back many, many years. I want you to share information to people based on what you think they want to know. So for this slide, I've included a quote from just a terrific book. This book has nothing to do about risk management, but it was one of my favorite reads from last year. It's called The Gentle Swedish Art of Death Cleaning by Margareta Magnusson. And the book is all about getting rid of belongings, tidying up, kind of pruning your life in a way, getting rid of things that you don't need. And not only that you don't need, but that your loved ones wouldn't want to inherit from you anyways, right? Simplifying your life. And she talks about, the book is kind of goes through a year in her life where she was getting ready to move from a house to an apartment. And she recognizes that she can't take all of the stuff she has. And so she starts doing what she calls death cleaning. And she's elderly, but she's not ill. But she's really trying to get her affairs in order so that when she does pass on at some point in the future, she doesn't leave her loved ones with all this stuff they have to clean up. And there's another quote in the book that I really like, which is, your loved ones want to inherit nice things from you, not all things from you. It's just so many witty kind of comments like that in the book. But she talks about how doing this death cleaning, she wound up finding things that she had hidden from herself, right? That she couldn't find because she couldn't remember where she hid them because she put them in a safe place. And I don't know if any of you have ever done that, but I've done that. Years ago, I had a spare key to my house, and I thought, you know what, I should hide this. I should hide it outside so that if I'm ever locked out of my house, I can get my spare key and get back in. Well, wouldn't you know that it wasn't weeks later that I couldn't remember where I hid the key. I still don't know where that key is. So completely useless. So I love this quote. It's no fun to play hide the keys when you've hidden it from yourself. Don't hide things from the team members that you expect to trust you. You know, you have to trust them as well. So try to be as transparent as possible and make as many things, put as many things out in the open as you can so that people are ready to respond, so that the team can step up and handle the risks that you face and be ready, right? And be resilient. Number 2 on my list is from Ray Dalio, who's a philanthropist and hedge fund manager who wrote a book called Principles. And these are kind of like principles to live by, both personally and in the business world. And it's there's some really interesting things in this book and interesting insights and thoughts from Ray Dalio. But one of my favorites is this quote about finding out that you are wrong is even more valuable than being right. And he really celebrates in the book the idea that, you know, each of us is wrong from time to time. Some of us more often than others. But as a leader, it's so important to acknowledge when you're wrong and to be vulnerable and to be humble and not pretend to be a leader who has all of the answers, right? Great leaders have tons of questions, but don't necessarily have all the answers. So I think that's great advice as we think about, you know, is our agency ready for disruption? Are we resilient? Are we building resilience over time? And even as we look kind of critically, take a critical look at how did we handle the pandemic? How were we at navigating through the pandemic? And were there some things we did really well? Are there some things we didn't do well? You know, this isn't about winning. This is about being honest with ourselves, being humble, being vulnerable, and trying to do better each and every day, right? Trying to do better and create this culture of continuous improvement where we celebrate the fact that we want to do better and we're committed to do better and we're committed to learning. And I think when you really believe in these concepts and you show others that you believe in them, you'll bring them along with you. And then my third takeaway was to embrace mistakes. And this is from another terrific book. This is one of my favorite books from last year, called What Philosophy Can Teach You About Being a Better Leader. And the authors cite the work of many different philosophers over the ages, including Buddha. And I learned so much. Philosophy was not a subject that I studied in school. So I thought this book was going to be really difficult to read. I thought this would be very technical, but it wasn't. There were so many practical insights in this book, and one that I just absolutely loved and I thought was so relevant to this topic of readiness and resilience and being willing to evaluate our readiness. Are we ready for what's next? Is this idea of embracing mistakes. And in the book, the authors say, results don't come from best practices, but rather from unique practices, from embracing error as opposed to avoiding error. And I think this is relevant to community action and to the nonprofit world for lots of reasons. But one is that, many of us just clamor to best practices. We want to implement best practices. We want to know what they are. We want to, embrace them and pursue them. But in so many instances, what's a best practice in one agency doesn't really work in another agency. And so we need to build and cultivate and develop unique practices and approaches and problem-solving methods that work in our environment, right? There may be some similarities with another community action agency, but it may not always line up perfectly. So I encourage you to think about this a little bit more deeply. What are those unique practices that are meaningful and work well in your agency may not be the right practice for another agency. And when someone makes a mistake, whether it's you as a leader or the team or a specific team in your agency, or overall, you make a decision that doesn't work out well, I want you to just give yourself permission to reflect on that mistake, think about it, maybe do a root cause analysis of that mistake, and hold back from blaming somebody, right? There's a human tendency to place blame this human tendency to place blame on other human beings when things don't go well. But sometimes mistakes are due to systemic issues, right? Sometimes mistakes happen because we give people conflicting messages, mixed signals, and it's not because somebody just did something wrong. So it's important to kind of look more deeply when mistakes happen. All right, Denise has asked a question about the book by Margareta Magnusson, which I mentioned, which is called The Gentle Swedish Art of Death Cleaning. It's not a book about risk management or management. It's about cleaning. It's about tidying up. It's about pruning your collection of possessions, of material things that you own, so that one day when you're no longer here, you don't leave this huge burden on your family and your loved ones to go through your home or your apartment and get rid of things that you probably should have gotten rid of yourself. So that's what it's about. It sounds like a very depressing book, but she has a wry sense of humor. And again, she talks about doing this death cleaning over a period of months or years. You don't want to be doing it all, in one fell swoop. It takes time. But I've actually followed her advice and found it to be a good experience. And actually, I convinced my sister to do the same thing as well, where we've gone through and we've gotten rid of things that we don't need, right? We don't envision needing for the rest of our lives. And so there are less things for our loved ones to have to take care of after we're gone. That was my my last final tip and takeaway. Please feel free to share a final question or a comment in the chat box, if you will. I've had a little bit of chat going back and forth, and I really appreciate that Denise has posted this slide deck, so you've got that. I've just reminded you a couple of times that I hope you'll reach out to me if you have questions, something you want to ask that you'd prefer not to talk about during the session. We are here to help you. We provide risk help to community action agencies across the country. There's no cost for that. So please take advantage of it. And, you know, we work in a nonprofit just like you do. And so we have a great affinity to community action, a great affection for what you're doing in your communities, and would love to have the opportunity to help you out on this topic of resilience. So thank you so much for being here today and joining us for the first in this series of resilience webinars. And I don't see any further chat messages, but thanks everyone.
All right, and Melanie, if you could pass back the ball to me so I can be the presenter.
Okay, that's very good.
And we'll still wait for questions to come in as well. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. I just want to let you know of some upcoming sessions. Our next session with Melanie is going to be on March 18th, called Managing Data Equity, Risk and Reward. There's also on the 24th, this coming week, Organized Knowledge is Power, Tips for Data Aggregation and Visualization, with Rance Graham-Bailey, Greg Bala, and Jessica Cole. All right, and just as a reminder, there is a quick survey following the chat or following the seminar. If you please would take that, we do appreciate your feedback. And do you have any closing words for us, Melanie?
No, just to say thanks again for having me today, and please reach out if you have questions. You want to talk about anything resilience related or risk related, I'm here to help and would love to hear from you.
All right, thanks for everyone for attending. Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you.